In the last section, we got our model set up and we're ready to start actually working on the part that we will be focusing the remainder of the tutorial on. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to start with the side view. And there's a couple things that you're going to start to notice already. One, it's a little bit hard to see the objects. However, if we select to the head, we're actually going to see that a little bit easier. And then two, there's a bunch of other objects here that, depending on what view we're looking at, are most likely going to end up being in the way. You can see that, right, this sphere's in the way. It makes it hard to see what's on that view. And the same goes for this one, right? The sphere makes it really hard to see what's going on with our technical drawing underneath. So what we're going to do is first, we're going to make sure we have the head selected, and then we're going to do this viewport solo button. What that does is it basically hides everything else in the viewport and allows us just to focus on the one object that we're currently working on, which is what we want. And so now the first step we need to do is we need to make this thing editable. And I want you to note in the side view here, right, that I did not pull this down yet. There's a lot of other parts we're going to be working on, but the step one is going to be to make this editable so we can do our work. So again, there's this button down here that's make editable. You can also hit the letter C on your keyboard. And as a reminder, right, the reason we can't see any real tools at this point is because we're in model mode. And in order to start manipulating points, edges, or polygons, we need to change to one of these different views or one of these different modeling modes. So I'm going to click on points mode because that's what we're going to be working on most in the next little bit. And then I just want to make sure it looks like our cube is a little rotated. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the coordinates for my head. If yours is not rotated at all, then you have nothing to worry about. For me, I need to set this to 0. All right, it was set to -1 degree. I have no idea. I must have clicked it and moved it a little bit while I was modeling the other stuff. But if you notice something looks a little bit wonky, always double check and make sure you didn't accidentally move it a little bit. Okay, so we're going to be using the brush selection tool pretty heavily. And there's a couple different modes we're going to be using when we do it. So if we select the brush selection tool, you'll see there's a bunch of options here. And I want to make sure that I am there. Okay. And yeah, right now it's just on axis. Yours probably started up with options, and maybe it was options and axis highlighted at the same time. It doesn't really matter, but the big thing is there's a few settings here that you want, one in particular that you want to make sure you pay attention to, and that's visible only. What that means is, say I'm in my back view and I select this point, right? If I look in my perspective view here, you can see that I've selected that one point. However, in this case, it would be nice if I could move, say, both of these points at the same time, right? Both corners at the same time. Now, one way I could do this is that I could select both of these, and you can see now I can move either both of those two, although what I really wanted to do was actually select, right, both of these, right? It looks like it's only one point selected here, because then I might want to, say, bring this down to wherever the actual body of this object is, right? And that allows me to do both edges on that side. Now, it's kind of frustrating to go back and forth between these different views. There's one other thing that catches a lot of students off guard, and it's really easy to do. When you select this point, in most programs, you would actually, if you wanted to, say, move this around like left or right or up and down, rather than hover over one of these axes or this triangle, you would actually click on top of this. Now, the issue is if you do this in 3D software, what happens is that you're actually, and notice what's happening in my 3/4 view, but I'm moving in the direction that's the axis that's facing the camera. Right? So I'm pulling it towards and away from the camera in my back view right now. I'm hoping this makes sense. It's something that I did a lot when I started, and I didn't know why my model was all like sideways and weird. And it's something that I've seen a lot of students do as well. So be very careful. The habit is to click on the point itself. You actually, if you want to move in both directions at once, you click on the triangle here, right? And you can move this thing around. And notice it's not moving forward and backward. It's just moving in a circle that way. Or if you want more control, right? If you just want to go up or down, right? You can move it this way or left and right, right? We can move it that way. Okay. So, but we don't want to just select this point, right? This is actually where the top of the shape kind of starts. If we look at our additional reference images, you'll see there's these additional plates that are here on the side. And so we want to actually have our objects start on the inside of those plates. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to select both of these points. Now here I could pretty easily do that. However, this visible only option, if I uncheck that, what that allows me to do is click over here and select both of those points at once without ever moving away from this view, which is just really labor saving. And it helps with doing things symmetrically. Now, the other thing is, right, I've done this once. If I move this over here, it's not going to be exactly in the same place that this other one is, and everything's going to be a little bit out of symmetry. So let's go ahead and look at how we can, another way we can use symmetry. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on symmetry. And I want you to note that at this point, just like when I have symmetry on for an object here, when I'm doing modeling symmetry, right, I still have a plane that things are moving symmetrically around. The red color means that it's currently around the X plane. If I click on this setting here, I could, right, turn on Y, I could turn on Z, right? I could just have all of them on, but in this case, we just want X, right? And we're happy with every other setting that's here. It's going to work out really well for us, okay? So I've selected those 2 points, and it's automatically selected the other 2 points on the other side. And so now I can come down and I can move all of those 4 points at once, right? Saves a ton of time and energy. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the bottom. I'm going to select this, and I want you to note when I hover over this one, it actually highlights that other point, letting me know that they're set. Now, if for some reason these points are more than a centimeter off of each other's location relative to the center plane, they will not act as symmetrical points, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this in. And again, there's some plates there that I just want to make sure I'm clear of. And I think we're going to go ahead and say that's more or less the bottom of the shape, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and do the same thing. But let's do this in the other dimension. So if I click here, you'll see, right, I'm not getting a symmetrical point over here, which isn't what I want anyway, but I am getting this other point behind it selected, right? Both of these are being selected. And now I can pull this down and make the front edge of this. And if you need this to be larger, right, we can always go here. I use my small monitor because it actually has higher resolution than my large monitor. So when you are viewing these on YouTube, you can zoom in and see things a lot better and a lot higher resolution than you can if I'm on my larger monitor. Okay, so we're also going to pull this up here. And you can see there's like a little bit of extra material down here. We're going to go ahead and deal with that when we start to make the rest of this box. So let's go ahead, and you can see we're starting to get something that's the right shape. However, the front of our box does not look right. Now, this is one of those cases where I may want to, actually, I think I have the points I want selected, but in this case, I don't know what's the front and the back, right? I don't know where I'm at. So this would be a good time to turn this off, just to see, okay, so this is the back edge, right? So I actually want to be selecting the points up here to select the front edge because I want to taper that in more than I've tapered the back. So I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen for the front view. And I've got, right, I know now, right, it's really kind of confusing what's selected and what's not. But again, I was able to turn this whole thing on and double check and make sure that, right, indeed, the front points, the lower front points are the ones I have selected. So I could try and move these points, but you'll see I have both of these points selected. If I select this one, I can go ahead and move it. Whereas if I had both of them selected, right, it puts my axis in the middle. And so there's two ways you can go about this. You can either select this one point and use the symmetry to move this over to where it needs to be. Or if you had both points selected, you can also use the scale tool. I can hit the letter T on the keyboard, or I can click the scale tool here, and I can actually scale these into the center. And so really, this is one of those things where it just depends on how you're working. And so I'm going to go ahead and put these points down here. And if I zoom in a bit, you'll see, right, this is the edge that I'm trying to align that point with, and it looks like I'm pretty close. And as I said before, right, things are off a tiny bit. I'm not super worried about it. As long as I'm doing things symmetrically along the center line here, it doesn't matter if they're perfect or not. Okay, so those are those front 2 points. So let's go ahead and see if we can make sure we find the correct points for the front here. So I'm going to go ahead and pop out. I'm going to use my selection brush to select these 2 points. And now that I know I have the correct 2 points selected, I'm going to pop in, oops, that's the wrong view. I'm going to pop into the front view, and this is where I want these points to be. So I'm going to go ahead and use the scale tool since I already have both sides selected. And I'm going to scale this into here. And it looks like it could all go down just a little bit in this view, but if I pop over to the other views, it looks like it could go down here as well. And it does look like it's more or less correct here. But I'm going to go ahead, because it's just like a little bit off in this view, I'm going to go ahead and maybe, oops, wrong one, maybe drop these down just a touch. So I'm going to hit the letter E on the keyboard or use my move tool, because then I can move both of these points down at the same time. And then if I select here, I've got that point selected, and I can just pull these down just a tiny bit too. And then this should line up with the back view a little bit better than it did before, which it does. And really, again, right, we're not going for perfection. We're going for good enough. And this is really beginning to look like what we want. So that's fantastic. This would be a great time to save your project. Okay, so we've started this process of editing things, and now we need to go a little bit further. Okay, so the next step is blocking out this front part here. And to do that, what we're going to do is first, let's go ahead and go back to view solo mode. So we get rid of all the stuff that's in the way. And then we can rotate our view. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn symmetry off too. It's kind of in the way, and we don't need it for this next part necessarily. So what we're going to do is I'm going to rotate this view upside down. And then what we need to do is we basically need to create a subdivision here. Right? We need to create a subdivision so we can extend the base of this. Now, one of the things that we're trying to do, and this is something where, especially if you're designing assets that are going to be used in a video game, you want to reduce the number of polygons to the lowest number possible while still maintaining like the highest quality modeling you can get. And so that sometimes comes in with like more advanced texturing to make up for low poly models. But the goal really is to like find that happy space where whatever gaming system you're developing for isn't going to have a meltdown because you have far too many polygons on here. And so to start with, we're just going to try and keep these as simple as possible. It also makes texturing a lot easier because you can see what you're doing a little bit more effectively. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and create an edge or a cut right about here. And to do that, we have our model upside down here. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can flip this over. And maybe what I'll do is instead, let's go ahead and see if we can go to our cameras here and go to our bottom view on this model. And so we kind of have to pay attention to approximately how far back this edge is. And there's two ways we could do this. We could either do a loop cut, which will put a cut through the entire body, but that could be problematic for other reasons. Or we can do a cut that just goes across this bottom polygon. And that's what we're going to start with. So we're going to go ahead and select polygon mode. We're going to use our selection tool, and we're going to select the bottom polygon. You'll notice it has selected everything, right? It selected all these different polygons, which is not what we wanted. And that's because visible only is unchecked. So we need to go ahead and check mark visible only, click off in space so we can deselect stuff, and then make sure we've selected the bottom polygon. Once we have that selected, we're going to use the knife tool or the cut tool. The icon is a knife. It's line cut. It's down here. There's loop cut, line cut, and plane cut. I don't use plane cut all that much, but I use line cut and loop cut a lot, or path cut. And so we're going to go to line cut. And with line cut, one of the things we can do is we can restrict it to the selection, right? If I was just to go ahead and do a line cut right now, you'll see it's going to cut through the sides. You can see it in the perspective view there, right? There's cuts everywhere, which isn't what we want. And I'm going to go ahead and say Command Z to undo that. So if I check mark restrict to selection, and then was to click and drag, now you can see it's only cutting that bottom. And I want you to note that in that side view, you can kind of see where my points are. And if I hold shift, it'll do a straight cut, right? It'll lock it. I don't know, I think it does 45s or 90s. Okay, and so currently that's not exactly where I would like this to be cut. What I would prefer is to slide this thing so it's about right where that bend starts or where that edge starts. So you can see I've got one there. So now I can come over here, I can click and drag, I can hold down shift and snap it into place. And that's right where I want my cut to be. Now to set a cut, what you do is you hit the escape key. And as soon as I do that, you'll see I have these two polygons now, right? Whereas I only had one previously. And so now I can use my selection tool or my selection brush to select just that polygon that I want. And then there's a tool we have not been introduced to yet called Extrude. And what Extrude does is it kind of does what it looks like. If I click on this, and again, this is something that throws a lot of people off. If I click on the actual polygon with the tool, I'm going to move the actual polygon, and that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is extrude this surface and have geometry created between these two surfaces. And to do that, I actually have to click off in empty space. If I click and drag, you can see now that I'm getting those polygons, right? Whereas if I just click on the polygon itself, oh wait, they fixed it. Maybe they fixed it in this version. That's fantastic. So it used to, if you selected it, oh, there we go. If you select right in the center, right, it's going to stretch the whole thing, and that's not what you want to have happen. You want to click drag. And I want you to note every time you click, you may not see anything change, but every time you click, it's going to create it's going to create a new subdivision. That can be your enemy or your friend. In our case, we're going to go ahead and we just want this to have one continuous subdivision down to this point. So I'm actually going to use the tool in the right view. I'm just going to click and drag until that bottom edge touches where the bottom edge is. Then I can go ahead and click and drag this a little bit. Now I can use my rotate tool, and I can hover over the red ring here, and I can rotate this so that it fits there. I can hit the letter E or the move tool so I can set that there. Now that I've got this more or less set here, I can start to adjust some of the errors that have happened, right? If I look at this view, and I know I'm upside down, you'll see it actually kind of spread out a bit again. It doesn't look quite like it's supposed to look, and it went straight down. It didn't really follow the taper of these edges, right? So let's go ahead and start fixing some of those things. And to do that, we're going to go back into points mode, and we're going to zoom in, and we're going to say, okay, where are the points I want to fix first? So first, I'm going to select this point, and note it only selected one point. So I'm going to uncheck visible only, deselect that, select it again. Now I've got those two back points. So I can move this point until it's about where I want it to be. And I can actually select where I made the cut, and I can pull that back just a little bit so that lines up better. I can zoom in to the foreground here, and this point's a little bit too far forward. So I'm going to go ahead and nudge that there. Okay, that looks a lot better. Now let's go ahead and look at the front view. And things look a little bit weird here, but you can kind of see that this is that front face. This is like the weapons that we're going to be making a cutout for, but this is that front face here. And so these are those first two front points. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, those are the bottom two front points. So what we can do is, since I have them both selected, I'm going to hit the letter T or use the scale tool here. And I'm just going to scale these in together and try and get them somewhat close, right, to that edge. And, you know, as I said, everything's just like a hair off. I could nudge the entire drawing over by a pixel or two, but it doesn't really matter to me. And then these back corners also need to move in the same way. And so I could go up and turn symmetry back on and select these and then move them in this way if I wanted to. I'm just really trying to show a lot of possible ways to work with this. Okay, let's make sure that's looking good. Let's go ahead and look at our perspective view and see if this is in its current state is starting to look like it should. That actually looks really pretty accurate. I'm pretty happy with that layout. If we wanted to, we could always turn this back on, right? So we could start to see here and we could go back to our references, right? It is always good to have references. So yeah, that's starting to look pretty accurate to how we want this entire model to appear. Fantastic. Those might be tapered in a little bit more than I would like them to be. I might want them to be about the same width as those points. So maybe I'll pull these points out just a touch more. There we go. I think that's going to make it look a little bit more accurate to the model itself. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save this. So that's the extrude tool. It allows you to pull out surfaces. We're going to be using this a lot. And specifically, if we look back at our references, we're going to actually use it to pull out, say, this front panel, to do some of the other parts that need to be done on here. But we're going to start with making some more cuts, and we're actually going to pull this panel out. And I want you to know, oops, if I go back, there's a little lump there. We're going to make a cut for that. We're not going to work on that yet. And we're actually going to cut these windows out and make those little flop panels real quick. Okay. So let's go ahead and go to our front view. And we can go ahead and hide everything but what we're working on. And then let's go ahead and take a look at this. I think there's one little error I've made here. This is the edge that it should probably follow that's kind of obscured by these other edges. So I'm going to go ahead and select these points, and I'm going to pull these out just a hair more in the back. And then that makes me wonder if these additionally need to go out a little bit further. They don't need to go out quite that far, but somewhere in there. And maybe these need to come in just a tiny hair more. And maybe these go down just a hair. There we go. Okay, that's a little bit more accurate. Okay. So the next thing we need to work on is we need to start cutting these windows out and kind of cutting out this panel. Because what we're going to do for this panel is we're just going to create a cut, and then we're going to use the extrude tool to pull it out a little bit. And we'll even go ahead and use the extrude tool to pull it out and to create kind of like a beveled edge on the back side a touch. And then we're going to need to cut these out. So we're going to start with that front panel though. And so to make that cut, we're going to go down to the knife tool, right? If the loop path cuts there, you can do this. This tool is also, if you hit the letter K, and then if you hit the letter K and then you hit the letter K one more time, that's the line cut tool. And you can see it's wanting to select this polygon. If I go ahead and make sure I'm in polygon mode, and I can go ahead and actually select this polygon, and you'll note again, it selected all these different polygons. I want to turn on visible only, deselect everything, and just select this front polygon. And then if I go back to my line cut tool, right, it should say restrict to selection. This is going to make my life a lot easier as I go forward. Okay, so I'm zooming in and I'm going to go ahead, and it's kind of hard to see once this highlights, which is annoying, but I'm going to go ahead and drop a point here, drop a point here, come up here. You can kind of see what's going on. Again, if it's not perfect, it's not the end of the world. And then I'm going to connect this. Once I've done that, right, I haven't made the cut yet, but I can go ahead and manipulate these points further if needed. And I would say that I didn't do the best job with the 2 points up here. So if I hover right over this point and click and drag, I can nudge this down a bit. I can click and drag on this point and nudge this down a little bit too. Make sure that's nice and square and straight. It looks like both of these could maybe go out a little bit more to the side. Just a little bit more. And then if I hover here, you can see that line highlights. Unfortunately, what it does is it adds another point. It doesn't let you move the line, which is what I would like it to do, but that's okay. Okay, so I've got this pretty well set. I'm kind of happy with where that's at. So then I can just hit escape to set that cut. And then let's go to our perspective view. All right, so you can see that now we've got this polygon here that we can select. And once we've selected that polygon, what we can do is we can go ahead and select our extrude button and click and drag. And in this case, what I'm going to want you to do is we're going to make this so it has 2 subdivisions of extrusion. So I've done 1 subdivision of extrusion. And then I'm going to go ahead and undo that, but I want to do it with a little bit closer view, and I'm going to make this larger. So 1 subdivision of extrusion. Note that one direction will push in, one direction will pull out. And I don't need that to be very large. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to shrink the scale of those a little bit, and or expand the scale of this a little bit once we do this next one. So now that we've made that a little bit smaller, we could potentially set this. And I want you to note this axis is not currently aligned. It's vertical, whereas the plane is at an angle. And so if I try and do certain types of operations, it's not going to go well. If I go to selected and do normal, however, as my orientation, and again, I've selected the scale tool. These are the options for it. Position is selected. That means it's this selected polygon. Orientation is normal. Normals are basically the direction that a polygon is facing, right? And so we have this set to normal. So now if I was to do a scale either down or up in size or whatever, it's going to scale it accurately in orientation, the orientation that we want. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and scale this up just a tiny, tiny bit, which it's hard to actually see this. There we go. And I just want to go a little tiny bit. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead, and the quick key for the extrude is the letter D. And so I'm going to go ahead and click and extrude this out just a little bit more. Right? And so now you can see it tucks in a little bit. It's not quite perfect, but it tucks in a bit. I can also go ahead and go to edges mode. And if I was to go to loop selection here, I could loop select the edges right there against the edge, hit the letter T to scale it. It's selected in normal. I want you to note, though, that that is not quite the way it should be, right? So that's something to be conscious of, is that when you're in edges mode, it doesn't always work the same way. And if I go to scale this down, you'll see that it's changing the geometry of the underlying object in an unfortunate way. So let's go ahead and see if we can loop select in polygon mode and just zoom in and see if we can loop select these polygons. For some reason, it is not letting me loop select those all as a singular thing. It's cutting it off at the top edge for some reason, which is so strange. Okay, so that, oh, and the bottom edge is not selected yet either. And I'm going to turn symmetry off just because that could, oops, potentially cause some problems right now. And I'm going to say, let's go to normal. And you'll see the normal is not right. Axis. In some cases, you aren't going to find an orientation that's going to work out well for you with this. So it's best to do this earlier in the process. And per object transform object. Yeah, this is, again, in this case, right, I'm not going to be able to very easily align my axis without making some changes. And so one of the changes I could do is I could go ahead and rotate it, but I'm actually pretty happy with the panel the way it is. And so for the purposes of time and the tutorial, we're just going to go with it. What I would do normally is I would undo the last couple steps, shrink the entire shape down while it's still that one polygon, and then go ahead and build from there and expand out, because that is easier and faster than trying to do any of the other possible options that are there. It does look like maybe part of the issue is that I don't have everything selected around the edges, but I'm not too worried about it. Okay, so let's go ahead and make our window cutouts. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our front view. And in this case, right, we need to use our selection tool to select the polygon we want to make cuts in. We're going to use the knife tool. And we need to go ahead and start making our cuts. And so I'm going to start here, go across to here, down to here, down to here, and up to there. And you can see that's pretty good. I have found, and I don't know if this is true any longer, but the symmetry tool does not really work very well with the knife tool, with the cut tool. And I haven't really found a good solution to it. And it ends up causing a lot of heartache for students. So we're just going to go ahead and do this manually and be happy with the slight irregularities that we're going to have. Okay, so you can see I do have some irregularities here. This, I can click on this point and I could try and make this more square. It's closer. And then this corner, it looks like could be, that's pretty good. I mean, we're making a model of a model. Now we've got these two set. I'm going to hit escape. So we have those two. While we're here, since we know we want like a little cutout for whatever the heck's going on here in the middle, let's go ahead and just go and do that as well. And I'm just going to use this big box as the boundary here. And you can see I messed up that last point there. So I'm just going to pull this until it's more or less square. Or really close to square again. Not the end of the world if it's not. Okay, and hit escape. Okay, so we now have a few more holes potentially in our surface. And so we're going to use a tool now because what would be nice is first, if we look at our drawing and we actually, let's go ahead and look at one of the reference images. You can see in most of these, and let's see, this is probably the best one actually here. And let's zoom in a touch, right? That there's some rounding on these edges. Now there's also some steps here. We're not going to worry about this for our model, but you can see that there's these corners are rounded. They're not hard and they're rounded as well on this shape. And so the question is, how can we make, right, those changes? And so to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to go into points mode and we're going to select, oops, we are going to use the selection tool to select the points that we want to round, right? And so I want to round all the points on this window. And this is going to be our test bed, right? We're going to work on this one first, and then we will go and apply these to the others. And so I've got these points ready to round. And so what I can do is use this bevel tool. If I click on the Bevel tool, there's a whole bunch of settings here we're not going to worry too much about, except we do want to set our subdivisions. I'm going to go ahead and set the subdivisions to 2. And what this does is when we create a bevel, when it starts to create the bends that we want, it means it's going to put a couple extra points in there, which helps with rounding. If it's 0, you just get like a cut corner, if that makes sense. And then again, I'm going to click off into space somewhere. I'm just going to click and drag. And you'll see that I've started to get some rounding. And when I get to a point where I feel like that's somewhat accurate to what it looks like in real life, I'm going to go ahead and let go. And I want you to note that, right, it's got all of these settings here that are what I just did. And if I go down to the bottom, you'll see that there's this option to apply and this option for a new transform. Don't click any of those buttons yet. But now I can go over and I can use my selection tool and I can select these points. Now I want you to note that somehow I got an extra point in here. And that's going to mess everything up for us when we do this on the other side. And so what I need to do before I do anything else is I need to weld these 2 points together. That's the simplest way to get this point out of here. So if I select these 2 points and I go down to the welding mask here, if for some reason a needle and thread is up, the weld's underneath it, but I do go to my welding mask and you'll see it has this white point that highlights between the 2 or floats over it. That basically says where the new point from the weld will be. We want it to be in the corner, so we just click on the corner and it's just going to snug that point over there and it's going to disappear. Now that we've done that, we can use our selection tool and hold down Shift and select these corners. Once we've got those corners selected, if we click on the Bevel tool and we go and scroll down in the attributes and click New Transform, it will apply the exact same thing we did here to the other side. And now we can do the same level of bending to this other object. So let's go ahead and click on this one, this one, this one, this one. And again, we want to make sure it's visible only so we're not accidentally selecting anything underneath. And in this case, we might actually want to select something underneath, but we're going to find out really quick. So I've selected all of those points. I'm going to go back to my Bevel tool, and it does annoy me that this is hidden by some of these things. I'm going to click on New Transform, right? And these are going to be softer bends because it's not quite a big of an angle, but right, we're going to get those same bends around all of that. And we might as well go ahead and do it to the center square as well while we're here. So if we do bevels at some other point, we don't lose our transform settings. So we're going to click on Bevel. And we probably could have done all of these in one go as well, but I wanted to show you how possible it is to have these work in different ways. Okay, so now we've got all of those beveled. That's fantastic. Let's go to Polygon mode. And what we're going to do now is we're going to select our windows. Now, we could just delete these. We could just hit delete and those polygons would be gone and there would be a hole in there. But then we'd have to try and make flaps that fit over the hole, and that would be kind of a nightmare, whereas we already have essentially the general shape we need. So what we can do at this point is with those 2 selected, we can right-click on there and we can go down to Split. And if we click on the gear by split and not just straight on split, you'll see that it says keep polygon segments in source object. We want that unchecked, right? Because we actually want holes there, but we want these to be the flaps that we're going to use. So we're going to hit OK. And when we do that, I want you to note that there's head and now there's head 1 over here. And head 1, if I hide that, right, it opens up the view into the inside of that model because these are the flaps. So let's go ahead and just call these flaps so we know which one's which. And then one of the other things that would be nice is if we could flip those up, right? So they're not laying down. And so what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and we need to adjust where this point of rotation is, right? Because right now, if we rotate these, they're going to flip, right in the middle, which kind of looks cool, but not the way it should. And so what we need to do is we need to move our axis. So we're going to select this axis, and then up here in the middle, there's the axis tool. If I click on Enable Axis, what this does is it means it's going to allow me to move the axis without moving the objects. As a note, the letter L on the keyboard is the quick key to do this. It is a very frequent thing that someone will accidentally hit the letter L, and then they'll go and they'll be able to move their axis, but they suddenly won't be able to move any of the objects in their model, and they freak out. And if that happens, if you're like, hey, my axis is moving, but nothing else is, look up here. If this is highlighted in blue, that's why. So now I've got that set, but I want to make sure that, right, when I look here, I really want my red line to be about even with the top edge of these things. Once I've done that, I can turn off enable axis. And now if I use my rotation, I can rotate these and they'll tip up. You'll see they're still kind of going down, just they're not quite where I'd like them to be. So maybe what I can do is undo that rotation, go to my axis, use the move tool, come in here, get a little bit closer up, and say maybe we can go up a little bit higher or maybe down a little bit. I don't think it really matters that much. I'm going to go up just a little bit higher. And then let's go back to our perspective view and let's rotate these up out of the way. So I'm going to hit the letter R, hover over that red thing, and rotate my points up. Now, the other issue is that that axis is probably a little bit forward of where it needs to be to make that rotation happen exactly how we'd like it to. But for our purposes, it's going to work perfectly well. Now, one of the other things is these flaps aren't thin, right? They've got some thickness to them. And so it used to be kind of annoying to add thickness to things, but now they have this Thicken Generator. And so what we can do is we can select on the Generators tab here where the subdivision surface starts, we can go down to Thicken. And now we can take and make our flaps a child of the thicken, and they get really, really thick, right? So if we select the Thicken Generator now in our hierarchy, we can go down and change this thickness to we can start with 1 centimeter, and that's probably actually really effective, right? That's a pretty good thickness. And again, we're keeping this model simple. I'm not trying to go super into detail, which is why we haven't thickened anything else yet. And we don't have tiers or, it's not well fitted. And that's just because the time it takes to do all of that is far longer than we need to focus on. Okay. So let's look at how we can cut out the chunk we need so those weapons can go in there, right? So you can see there's this cutout and you can kind of see how this edge works. Now, this is actually a case where thicken might be a good use. Again, once we make this initial cut out of the front surface, we could actually delete the whole polygon from the bottom. Let's go ahead and see how that works. So to start with, let's go ahead and make sure we have our head selected. And let's select this bottom polygon. Let's go ahead and just delete that. And it looks like from this view, we can delete the back one as well, right? We don't need this either, so let's get rid of that. And so now we just have this simple, thin plane. We do have a hole into the cockpit at this point. And so we could potentially fill in this polygon hole, which might be a wise choice. So let's go ahead and do that. There's this option here called Close Polygon Hole. If I click on that and I hover over this, you'll see that what it wants to do is it doesn't really want to put a floor in there, right? It wants to close off the hole that we just opened up. So instead, because this is a special case, what we need to do is we either need to create a polygon that will just fill in that's a separate object, or we can use our polygon pen tool. The polygon pen tool allows us to manually draw polygons. So I'm going to go ahead and click here in this corner, drag over here, click, rotate my view a little bit so I can see. I'm going to click in this corner. I'm going to come over to this corner and see if I can actually get it to select the corner that I'm looking for. There we go. And then now if I move my thing a little bit, you'll see I get this circle. That means it will close that polygon hole in. Okay, so we have a floor back in there. Now we need to cut away the front edge. And surprisingly enough, we're going to use the line cut tool to do that. So let's go ahead and go to a view where we can actually see our front surface, and we can see, okay, there's where the weapons are supposed to be. You can see that like things aren't perfectly aligned, but this is where we want this edge to come up to. And you can see it actually comes up a little bit higher than this front surface here, but we're just going to go ahead and go to that point. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. Click here. I'm going to hit escape. So I have that edge down there, and I'm going to go ahead and click about here and about there. And you can see things are not as square as they should be. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot everything over just a little bit to make it all more uniform. Or maybe, maybe I'll leave that there. Now, one of the things we can do, I already have these edges cut. I can also just go ahead and undo both of those and redo these cuts, or figure out where I want things to go in terms of being offset. Let's go ahead and, because this one's about a little bit off of here, let's go ahead and create this one right there. Go up to right about there, hit escape. And then we're going to do the same thing over here, but on this side, these are actually aligned. So let's go ahead and maybe bring this on the inside edge of this a little bit, because that's kind of where the other one was. That seems a lot better. Again, we don't need to be perfect for this. This is a learning exercise. Okay, so let's go ahead and pop this open. And now we can select this one polygon here, and we can just delete that out of the way. Okay, and so now we have the general shape of the object that we want. It's starting to look pretty great. We can go ahead and save it now. And it might be interesting to go ahead and see if we can thicken the head. So let's go ahead and apply thicken, and we'll look at some of the other settings that are available on thicken. And thicken is something I'm doing now, so we get some sense of how this is going to work. But but it looks like an MF Doom mask for Minecraft. That's exactly what this looks like now. So one of the things you can do with thickness is this position where it's set to 0%. That means it's sort of centered on where it was at. So first, let's make it 1 centimeter instead of 10. And then let's go ahead and bring this down to negative 100%. And what negative 100% does, it means that the original geometry is going to be the outside edge, and you can kind of see how the inside edge has the rest of this geometry. And you'll see it's not perfect, right? There's some fixing that would need to happen potentially, but that's something that's actually pretty hidden in the model. But now the entire thing should have some thickness to it that's about the same thickness as the rest of the shape. Now, for the rest of the modeling, before we go any further, we're probably actually going to turn thicken off. I just wanted to show you what that was like and how kind of easy that can make your life when you're doing things with just simple individual polygons and you're wanting to get some thickness to it. Okay. And the reason we're going to pull this out of the thicken is because we're going to be doing some more. We have to kind of push the back end in. We have to do some cuts and some other things to get that side geometry going. And so we don't want to thicken it until we get that. So I'm going to pull that out of the thicken. I'm just going to make it the bottom object because it's easier to select there. Okay. So we've pulled that out. Let's go ahead and just take a look at this with everything else on for a second. All right. We're already starting to make a lot of progress, making this look a lot more like our references. Right? So now in the next steps, we're going to go ahead and add these additional panels, these 3 additional panels here. We're not going to worry about this one and some of these smaller details we're not going to worry about at this point, but we're just going to do the general panels. And then we'll worry about we'll also look at the top hatch as well. Okay, see you in the next one.